It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
This next question, Brian, is from Aaron. Aaron says, I'm 42 and I've got a 401k from a previous job. I no longer work for the company, so I cannot contribute to it any longer. Should I convert that to Roth? What are the implications of that, Brian? So that I can add to it, or should I leave it there to grow? Basically, he's left employer. He's got we had a firm friend ask us the same question. I got this old 401k. What do I do with it?
Bo, you always do a good job because there's and we'll go through these. I mean, I'll make sure I leave enough meat on the bone so you can kind of go through the logistics of it. I just want to lay the groundwork for you because we know you can take the money.
That's not even an option. You say that's an option. That's option
so
zero.
So I pull
out.
the finger down because that's not actually an option. So let's redo one. You can leave it where it's at.
Yep.
Now, when would you leave it where it's at?
So if perhaps you're someone that's in a higher income situation and you don't want to roll it into an IRA, which we'll talk about in a second, you want to leave it in sort of that employer-sponsored ERISA type structure so that you can do things like Roth conversion strategies that are non-taxable. But maybe your new employer doesn't offer a 401k. You can't roll it into a new one. Or maybe the 401k isn't that great. Maybe it has really expensive investment options, or it's laden with a bunch of insurance products, but your old employer had a pretty good one that was low cost and easy to navigate. Those would be instances where it might make sense to leave your 401k behind.
So Bo just nailed it. So if you have a great plan, meaning you work for an employer and it has a low cost plan, say the Fidelities, the Charles Schwabs, or the Vanguards of the world, and you're in a high income situation, leaving it might be an option.
Yep.
You know, because the high income, because you want to keep the ability to do Roth conversion opportunities. Option 2 is you roll it over to an IRA. Mm-hmm. When would somebody consider doing that?
Yeah, so maybe your income doesn't preclude you from just doing direct Roth IRA contributions, and maybe you need a more diverse, more open architecture for designing a portfolio. You know, with a 401k, you're kind of stuck with love the one you're with in terms of the investment options. Well, maybe at your 401k, you've only got 10 to 12 investment options, and they're not very well diversified, and they're costly, and they're expensive. Well, you can roll it over to an IRA at a really low-cost provider, a Fidelity, a Schwab, a Vanguard, and it opens up the investment to the entire investment universe where you have a much more robust ability to build out a portfolio that better matches your unique circumstances, time horizon, and constraints. Now, here's the thing that this question is getting into that we don't talk to. When you roll it into an IRA, you got two choices. Do I want to roll it into an IRA rollover, a traditional IRA, or technically, theoretically, you could roll it into a Roth IRA.
Yeah, the problem with that is that you generate a lot of taxes. So if you're in a higher tax situation, that conversion is treated as ordinary income. So just be careful and mindful of that. So that's what, if you're in a higher income tax situation, you might want to just measure twice, cut once. Now, maybe it's not a huge account balance. Maybe it was $5,000-$6,000. You're under 30 and you're willing to pay
lower
the taxes on that because you're in a lower tax bracket. Yeah, maybe it does make sense to go ahead and roll it right into a Roth IRA. But then I did want to set up for option 3 because we've already covered leave it where it's at in your current employment plan or your employer plan. Option 2 is roll it into an IRA, which is either a Roth IRA or a rollover IRA. But option 3 is you might want to roll it into your new employer's retirement plan. When does that happen?
Yeah, so if your new employer has a lot of really good options, or the options are at least as good as your former employer, getting those assets over to the new employer might be a great idea because, one, you'll have account consolidation. It's easier to build and design a portfolio. And the new employer plan might have some really awesome either low-cost investment options, or maybe it's a plan that has like a brokerage link investment option or a Schwab personal choice retirement account investment option. Those types of benefits inside of a 401k plan can be huge. So if your former employer didn't have it, but your new employer does have it, it may make sense to consolidate in. And if you are in a higher income tax bracket and you are taking advantage of like an annual tax-free Roth conversion strategy, by rolling it from a 401k to a 401k, you leave that strategy intact.
So kind of just to close this thing out, because it's a great question, is that realize there's ERISA plans, the 401ks, 403bs, and so forth have the umbrella of creditor protection, that whole ERISA protection. They also shelter you to where you still can do Roth conversions. They also allow you to do loans on those accounts. We don't love talking about loans because
It is a benefit, though.
but it is a slight benefit if you get yourself in a pickle of a situation. So take all that into consideration, and then you pivot over to IRAs. And IRAs are great in the fact that, yes, they don't have the ERISA protection, but you get to control everything. You get to choose who you want to custody the money. You get to choose what type of investments, because a lot of 401ks, 403bs, you have to love the one you're with,
right.
where they're high cost. They don't have a lot of index funds. They don't let you diversify the way you'd like to. The IRA will let that, if you roll it over to an IRA, it fixes a lot of those issues. You just need to understand, what are you giving up if you roll it to the IRA versus what are you keeping if you leave it at the 401k? Knowing the pluses and minuses is going to help you navigate. And that's probably the best way to close this is that if this is a big account, you might want to talk to somebody
That's right.
professionally,
That's great.
take the relationship to the next level, because you don't want to screw this up. Because you hear about us talk about Roth conversion strategies, you hear us talking about doing backdoor Roth IRAs, you hear about us talking about the hyperaccumulation of the financial order of operations in your 3 buckets. All these things are interconnected into the question that Aaron asked about what do you do with these in retirement plans. It starts off as sounding like a very simple question, but there's so many variables. You just want to make sure that a blind spot of you just not knowing what you don't know keeps you or has you fall into a trap that really screws up your retirement planning.